So, Binny, thank you for joining us. We're going to
pleasure.
cover a lot of ground, everything from your -1 to 0 story to where the Indian ecosystem is, and we should have a bunch of time at the end, maybe like 15ish minutes to ask questions from the audience as well. So please, if you towards the end, if you raise your hand, if you have good questions, we'll bring a mic over to you. But let's go ahead and get started. Binny, tell us a little bit more about your -1 to 0 story. What inspired you to become an entrepreneur? I think Flipkart was 2007?
7, yeah.
Okay, so what kind of made you like, back in 2007, being a founder in India was not super sexy.
Yeah, there wasn't a thing. Being like a founder in India was, like I guess you could count them on, maybe not your fingers, but probably less than 100. Like,
so what inspired you?
It wasn't really the thing to do.
Yeah, so what kind of gave you like the confidence? What inspired you to just do it?
Yeah, so I think the first thing which led me to it was that Google didn't hire me. So, so I finished college in 2005, and then I interviewed at Google. I was working in Bangalore and interviewed at Google twice, once in end of 2005, and then once at the, I think 2006, middle of 2006. First time they took 8 interviews. And
to
say no. Second time they got smarter, they took only 4. So then I ended up joining Amazon by end of 2006. And when I joined Amazon, there was literally no work to do. So I would go to the office. So I was in, like, people are in 9 to 5 jobs. I was in like 12 to 5 jobs. So I used to go to reach office by 12 p.m., sort of surf the net for an hour, go have lunch. Then from lunch, play table tennis at the rooftop. Then think about what to do. Then go with friends to nearby coffee shop, have coffee, and then go back home. And this went on for 2 months. It's like, okay, now it's enough. I have to do something with my life. And during those couple of hours that I was surfing, I started reading about startups, mostly on US blogs. So because in India there was startups was not really a thing. There were a handful of VCs. There were some founders trying to do a few things, but nothing really big had happened. But thankfully there was, a lot being written about what was happening in the US. So I was reading TechCrunch, VentureBeat used to be a thing at that time.
That's true.
Mark Anderson had this P. Marsa blog, which was really amazing. So
talk.
I was reading all of these and I was saying, oh wow, there is
value add.
There is maybe this is an option. Google isn't hiring me. Amazon, there's no work. I can go to Microsoft or someplace else. It will be probably similar. So maybe this is what I should try. So and then Sachin, my co-founder, was in the same team as I was, and he comes from a business family, so he wanted to always sort of get into some sort of a business or startup. So he also was having similar thoughts. He also didn't have any work. So since both of us didn't have work, we said, okay, let's try and figure out something which we want to do together. And that's where the sort of -1 started. That okay, we need to do something. And from there, then we thought about what should we do, and that's another sort of story.
The next phase of the journey.
Itself,
Yeah, in a similar vein, when I first moved out to the Bay Area, I worked at Oracle for about like 8 to 9 months, and people often ask me like, "Hey, you weren't there for all that long before you joined Facebook. What is the impetus?" And at Oracle, it was crazy because anytime I would write even 2 lines of code, I had to go through literally like 48 to 54 hours of like regression testing. That's how long it took to like go and essentially submit a job. It would run for a long time. Then it would be verified by a team in India, and then they would like send you back results. So I would write 2 lines of code and then wait for 2 days with nothing to do. And it was during that time just like, this is a waste of my life. And it's funny how often that can be an impetus to like doing something better.
Yeah.
Okay, so what would you say, let's go back to, you started Flipkart with Sachin. What was the biggest challenge? Well, actually, even before getting to the challenge, like, did you ever care that much about like just to ask it frankly, like about what other people would think about this insane idea of being a founder, or have you always been wired to, in some ways, not seek out that validation?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So I think for me it was the latter. And a lot of sort of, if I look back, a lot of credit goes to my parents.
Okay.
So in India generally, like especially like around my peer group, my cousins, parents would sort of be a lot more protective, and they would tell their kids a lot about what to do and stuff like that. I think thankfully my parents kind of gave me an independent streak since like I think 6th grade or something. Like I was sort of on my own. They didn't really say that, oh, you need to be better at studies, or you need to do this, or you need to do that. So I was sort of left on my own, which was very different from at least other kids and their parents that I saw. So I think there was then all that kind of independence of thought developed from there. And then if I look at, so I was a very average student by like 6th, 7th grade. So I used to be not really good at studies. I was a little bit into sports. I used to play basketball and football. And then I think slowly on my own, I kind of realized, like sitting next to like my sort of neighbor who used to sit next to my desk, that I think one day I realized, like, why is he better than me in this? Like, why can't I do this? So then applied myself, got better, and went from like average to sort of almost best in math, science, at least those
Almost
things.
best.
Almost best, yeah. I was the best in, so I was the only one who knew how to code in school. Nobody else knew how to code, but I think other things almost there. And same if I look at college, I really didn't care about my grades and that I needed to be in top of class, but I really cared about what I was learning. So I took courses. So a lot of my peers again took courses to really up their grade point average, so they could score better grades and go to masters and or MBA, which looked good. For me, I think I just took stuff which seemed interesting. So I took some physics courses. I took computer vision and machine learning when it wasn't sexy. And nobody knew about it. They were all taking database courses because it was the easiest to score marks in database. So I was always sort of doing things that way. And that's how I went to Bangalore. So the job I got on campus was in a hedge fund called D. Shaw as a software engineer in Hyderabad. So I didn't want to go to a hedge fund, or neither to Hyderabad. So I wanted to go to Bangalore in a good engineering first company. So I applied to this company called Sarnoff, which was back in the day like invented televisions and was also big into computer vision and stuff like that. So went up. The couple of my seniors were working there, so applied through them and got there. And then that's why I think when I was thinking about this, I was actually thinking the reverse, that if I don't leave now and try this, like being in this job and not doing anything and learning anything is more riskier than not trying this, because I can fail in 18 months, but I'll get the same job or better job back. Like there was no downside, at least in my head.
I mean, to this day, I actually think that like whenever a kind of like a younger engineer asks me like, what is the downside of like either starting a company or joining an early stage startup, my reaction is actually incredulity. I'm like, there's literally zero downside.
There's only upside. Yeah,
there's literally only upside, because that engineer is in the lucky position of possessing the most important knowledge of our day and age, which is how to be a world-class software engineer. That person is basically guaranteed a job for life, right? Like for the rest of our lifetime, this person can make a ton of money at any of the big companies. So what incredible security, right? Like there's literally zero downside. Okay, so you were an independent thinker, and then when you apply yourself, you could be really good at stuff. So you had that confidence in you. Okay, so let me ask you, so did that confidence get at all shaken in the first 2 years of Flipkart? Because the first 2 years is always hard.
Oh yeah.
So tell us a little bit about some of the trickiest moments in the first 2 years.
Yeah, I think for us it was really 6 months, first 6 months.
Okay.
We got, I think again, we got pretty lucky that 6 months out, Sachin, my co-founder, figured out and learned this thing called SEO. And I think we hadn't I was telling the group that we started with like a seed capital of $10,000, which 5,000 each of us had saved for by working for a couple of years before we started. So we didn't have any money to invest in marketing or anything. So, but 6 months out, our SEO started working, and from then on, we kept like scaling 30-40% month over month, doubling every quarter for the next 3-4 years. So, but the first 6 months is the sort of the 2-year thing you're talking about, was sort of for us the first 6 months.
Okay, was it just the two of you?
It was just the two of us, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And what is I'm forgetting, I should know this. What is the first thing you sold? Was it books?
Yeah, we started with only books.
Okay. And you guys were doing a lot of the operations and stuff yourself, right?
Yeah. We didn't have money to hire anyone, so we would. So for early days, I had a bike, Sachin had a car, so we sort of take turns, and I mean, bike was cheaper from a fuel standpoint, so we would take. One of us would take my bike in the morning and go around, like I think at least 50-60 kilometers around the streets of Bangalore to different distributors and booksellers, bookstores, picking up books of the orders which came the previous day, and then bring them back, pack them, and send them out. So that, I think we did that at least almost for a year, the first year, on our own, before we had sort of enough orders. Like I think 40-50 orders a day is when we started hiring and recruiting other people to help us.
Amazing. I mean, listen, we could probably spend the whole time on Flipkart, but I'm going to try to switch it up to like broader topics. But before we move on from Flipkart, I think one of the things that I'm proudest of from the time I was on the board was that it's very rare to have a company that in-house develops a blockbuster new product from scratch. And I think Flipkart is one of those rare companies that obviously the initial product of the e-commerce thing is a resounding success, but they have also literally the whole -1 to 0 incubation journey of PhonePe, right? Like, which is a phenomenal story, which is just rare. Like, even if you look, whether it be actually in the Western Hemisphere or anywhere else, it's just rare to have two big hits. So tell us a little bit about PhonePe. I think that was just a phenomenal story. So like, how did you manage to pull it off within kind of like a larger corporate structure, which is quite rare?
Yeah. So payments was something on our mind since 2013, 12-13. So by 12, we started in 2007. We had become fairly successful in e-commerce. We had launched books, then electronics and fashion, and we could see sort of that journey scaling up. And we had seen in China with Alibaba with e-commerce, and then them doing payments, and here in the US, eBay and PayPal sort of also feeding off each other. So I think payments was always on our mind, and so PhonePe was actually a third attempt. So not our first attempt.
I remember
so we had a first attempt when our CTO wanted to do something new, so he moved and started a payments unit in 2012 or 13. That didn't work pretty well because till then the mobile revolution hadn't really happened. Then in 2015 we acquired another company which was trying to do mobile payments, and that didn't work either. And then 2016 is when this founding team of two ex-Flipkart people, Samir and Rahul, were working on this payments idea, and they just got a seed term sheet from one of the VCs. And I caught them right in time that, guys, if you're doing payments, we are going to do payments. So why are you doing this outside? Come back to the family. Let's do it there. So they came back, and the deal was that, run it like a startup. You will be a separate team, separate office. You will be nowhere near our office. So it's going to be like startup. There's just one VC, so you don't have any headache. You don't need to go around raising money, and we'll give you a much bigger seed check because that is what is needed for this business. And it's the opposite. Like, you'll earn equity as you go rather than starting from 100 coming down to 5. We'll go from 0 to 5, and that's how they started. And I mean, if you talk to Samir and Rahul, the co-founders, I think one of the big reasons why they say they succeeded was because they could 100% just focus on the product and the customers and the team. and how to execute.
Especially in a pretty competitive market.
Yeah, in a very competitive market with so many pressures. So I think they've done like a crazy job of that, and also they had access to. They were big talent attractors, and they had access to obviously some of the Flipkart talent.
Yep.
So they basically literally like pick and chose like the first 10 people.
Yeah, I remember that.
And formed like a really amazing team out of that. And it started in 2016. Like now they are so it's been what 8 years. So they have more than 300 million monthly active transacting users. So the size of US population, and growing still, crazily almost profitable as well, and hopefully going public in a few years as well.
Okay, old school. Yeah. All right. Happy to go old school. Okay. Let's switch gears, Binny, and just talk a little bit about the Indian ecosystem and investing in India. So obviously, the Indian startup ecosystem has grown significantly, had a bunch of momentum over the last 3 or 4 years. But let's maybe rewind back again to 2007, and since what were some of the historical challenges that startups faced that maybe have gotten better today?
I mean, it's difficult to compare those eras. I mean, 2007 was literally almost no startups, not many VCs. So there was nobody who has been there, done that at all, whether in investments or in startups, and like 25 million people online. So very small market.
Yep.
So very small market to go after, and very little capital available to go after those opportunities. Very little people to learn from.
Yep.
During those days, and very little infrastructure, digital infrastructure. Like there were no payment gateways. We had to do cash on delivery.
Yep.
There was physical infrastructure as well wasn't as developed. So we had to build our own logistics. We had to build our own last mile delivery as well. And a lot of these obviously problems are solved in India today. If you compare it to today, I mean, there is like a lot of the global VCs are there. There's a ton of capital. There are enough, and there are enough unicorns, some decacorns. So there's people who have been there, done that. And the talent pool in the ecosystem is very deep now, and not just in India. A lot of the talent has gone to countries like in Southeast Asia, Middle East, even here actually in the
You mean
valley.
talent from India coming here?
Yeah, there's a lot of ex-Flipkart folks now here as well. So I think it's a very different equation. I think just the entrepreneurial energy now in the ecosystem is a different level, and I think given that the founders now have sort of knowledge of various models and how to build even global companies, I think we are seeing a lot of them also having ambitions to build, not just for India, but globally as well, especially in software and hopefully in future in AI as well.
A couple of follow-up questions. How do you think that the government has played a big part in terms of policies and regulations, or could they be doing more?
I think the policies and regulation environment in India has been pretty solid and strong. So I think it is not. I don't think they've done anything like majorly, especially for the startup ecosystem. But they haven't also done anything which comes in the way in a bad way. So I think it.
So it's a light touch on both sides.
It is
which
a light
probably
touch,
like not bad.
Yeah, which is not a bad place.
Yeah.
Bad place to be. So I think it's been, on the balance, I would say it's been more good than bad.
Okay. I was going to say that I personally feel the Indian startup system is actually undervalued. But Claude here tells me that to ask that some critics argue that the Indian startup ecosystem is overvalued and that it is in a bubble. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I think there are pockets of each. I think there are probably some pockets where I think things are maybe little overvalued, and but I think they've gotten corrected over last few months,
Gotten
quarters.
corrected, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As well. I think like it's been happening everywhere. Uh, so I think it is, and there are some pockets which are, I think, uh, probably at the right valuation. And if you think about it, right, India's economy is 3.5 trillion,
Yep.
and I mean, if it is to go to 25, 30, there's a long, long way to go. So much to build.
Right.
Such a long runway if you take the next 20, 30 years for any Indian startup. Even if you think about e-commerce, right, there is 90% of it is yet to be done. So there's a lot to do in everywhere. So I think the opportunity is really massive.
So maybe to let's switch up gears here for a second. Let's say, a lot of entrepreneurs, I mean, some entrepreneurs here might actually have built a company in both India and Silicon Valley, maybe. Like you're one of them, as an example. But what are the similarities and differences? Like, is it easy for a founder from our beautiful city of SF to go to Bangalore and start a company? Do you think would they find stuff more similar than different? Versus, like, do you actually think that yes, you're building a technology company, a startup, but it's actually pretty radically different, like the two places?
Yeah, I think depends on the type of company you're building. If you're building an AI company or a security company or a software company, then I think it will be more similar than different. I think the culture and the way people work, especially product and technology teams work, probably there'll be more similarities than differences. I think if you're building a company serving the Indian consumers, I think there'll be a lot of differences on the ground, from how you market to them to how you need to build the product, your sort of how you think about design of the product, and things like that. So I think that would be, and on the ground, just the infrastructure is so different. So I think there would be a ton of differences if you're trying to build
like
B2C companies that are serving the Indian customer.
How would you compare the talent pools of like the Bay Area and Bangalore? Like, do you feel like it's about roughly like the same? Obviously, maybe not the same magnitude, but there are kind of like the same spikes available in Bangalore as well.
So I think in India now the talent has seen companies at scale.
Sure.
So I think what was missing, let's say even 10 years back, was like, how do you do stuff at internet scale? I think that now you have enough and more people in India. People have built products, digital first products at scale, etc. So I think that gap is not there. What is different here is sort of a lot of the deep tech stuff. I think that is still not as deeply available in India. For example, I mean, an LLM company really could not be sort of built first out of India. I mean, those kind of things are that type of talent is not in a big supply. But I think 10 years back, even like product managers, designers, all of that was a big issue. Probably still an issue, but not as much today.
Interesting. So what do you think is holding back the supply of, like, frankly, like the engineering and technical talent that can work on some of these more breakthrough pieces of technology or software? Do you think it's just exposure? Do you think it's a little bit more around a different mindset, a different approach?
I think it is all these things sort of go back to evolution, right? I mean, why are there now these good product and tech people who've seen scale? Because I mean, now, I mean,
they saw it happen.
They saw it happen, and at first one place, then now multiple places. So that evolution has happened. I think we haven't sort of, and that talent was kind of there. I think the supply of that talent with who are good at research and who can go deep in one area, I think that is not really. India's not become sort of a hub to attract that much enough, and we haven't had like any one success story so far. So I think it is hopefully somebody builds one, and then it creates the right momentum to build this talent pool around that. Yeah.
What do you think India should learn from the Chinese ecosystem?
Oh, I think India's been, already learning. I think for Sachin and me, we used to almost do a trip every 12, 18 months to China, because the Chinese ecosystem and the economic structure was way more similar to India than the US. US was very, very different. So for us, we felt there was way more to learn from the Chinese e-commerce companies and internet companies than looking at how the American companies were doing it. So I think there's been a lot which has already, I think we've all learned a lot from there. But I think now the two countries are, and I think ecosystems are on a different path, given sort of the geopolitics and the structural position of the two ecosystems. So I think there's probably some things to learn, but I think now entrepreneurs are rightfully so taking sort of a very first principles approach to
Makes sense.
what problems they want to pick and how they want to go solve them. So I think that's been the exciting part for me last 3-4 years. Like I see a lot more of that happening.
Amazing. The more interesting question is, what markets do you think in India are overplayed right now? And conversely also, like what markets do you think are underexplored in the Indian context?
So I think overplayed is difficult because, as I said, I mean, there's such a long ways to go.
Sure.
So it feels like nothing is overplayed. I think there's, even in e-commerce, you have newer models like, I mean, which don't work anywhere, starting to work in India, like the 10-minute delivery, quick commerce models. I never thought like that would work, and I think.
Is it actually working in India now?
Yeah, I think it is. It is actually. There is a public company which is making it work, and there is another big startup which is doing pretty well. So I think there's innovation happening even.
That's true.
Even there is. I mean, there's omni-channel vertical players doing fairly well in e-commerce. Newer models emerging there. So even in e-commerce, there is a lot of new things happening. And if you look at payments and fintech, similar sort of, again, at one place you can say, yeah, there's the companies with 300 million users, but on the other side, there's just so much to be built around lending, around insurance, around stock trading and all of that. So I think it's still very early days in all these mature, semi-mature areas. And then I think there's new areas like health.
Health is a big one.
Health, I wouldn't say ed tech, but education.
Sure.
As well, and even software. I think there's still long ways to go.
So I guess, maybe a question is like, if you think, I mean, you have a really good point, which is that, yes, the Indian economy is doing well. $3 to $4 to $5 trillion economy is good. Per capita GDP is still like pretty low.
2,500.
2,500, right? Like, it's less than 5% of the United States, right?
Yeah.
But so if you kind of take the 25, 30-year view, there's like an order of magnitude growth on essentially those metrics. So I think that makes a ton of sense. But I guess the question is, as an entrepreneur working in health, education, maybe even payments, how patient do you need to be? Do you need to be more patient in India, I guess is the question?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think in India, definitely things take much longer than I've seen. Like once in the US, once you figure out some product market fit, you can really explode much faster. I think in India, it takes a little more time to get to product market fit, and then even to go from there and grow, I think is a bit
Why
of a...
is that? Sorry, can you elaborate a little bit on that?
It's a bit of a journey. I think it is still, I mean, it's getting better, but I think it is still, the physical infrastructure is still difficult to navigate. It's not as easy as plugging into sort of a vendor ecosystem which can scale you across, especially if you're in a physical business. Digitally also, India is not one country, it's pretty diverse.
Yeah.
So you need to, it's not as homogeneous as the US market is. So you need to have multiple strategies to scale from point A to point sort of 10 times X. So I think it is a lot more. And then you can also run into talent sort of as you're scaling. There's talent available, but not I think there's a lot of competition.
There's a lot of competition.
From startups and global companies. I mean, a lot of global companies are setting up their businesses, operations, their GCCs, the global sort of outsourcing centers in India.
Some of the
So
stories I
it's
hear
a
about
lot of
the talent shortage and the talent wars in India remind me of like Silicon Valley, like circa 2012-13, where it was just kind of brutal. Yeah, one of the things that's weird about India is that on the one hand, there's some homogeneity like compared to like a highly fragmented structure like in the EU, right? Like you can set up one company, one entity, you can kind of have it be for the whole country. But then it's actually a lot more heterogeneous than like America, which is that their populations is like very different, essentially, like income levels, infrastructure kind of levels, language. So it's kind of hard to hold in your head, like they're almost like the different versions of India. So the the dimensionality can quickly increase.
Yeah.
What do you think, Binny? Before I open it up to the crowd here, we're obviously collaborating on starting an SPC chapter/hub in Bangalore, which we're very excited to be collaborating with you. But maybe we'll do the indirect plug for SPC, right? Which is the question I have is like, why do you think that this is an interesting opportunity, right? In terms of like allowing people like more space to kind of creatively explore and to tackle like the really big ideas. I remember by the way, the story of how this came about was that we had always wanted to do SPC in Bangalore in India at some point, and I was having a coffee with Binny in January, and I was just telling him, we were talking, and then he was like, in classic Binny fashion, he's like, why are you fucking around and not doing it right now? And I was like, oh, ha, don't know. And he's like, why don't we just do it together? We'll do it. And then I kind of like spurred us on to kind of like get everything into action. And this is what good friends do. They kind of kick your ass to like make you do more. So I thank you for that.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, like what kind of excited you in the first place?
Yeah. So one of the things I've been deeply passionate about, and I've spent a lot of time on since almost 10 years now, even while building Flipkart, was helping other founders in their journeys, because there was, as I said, nobody to learn from, so very few of us. And so I started doing some angel investing and also advising founders as much as I could. Obviously, I didn't have a lot of time. And slowly that became even more of a stronger interest for me. So by the time Flipkart got acquired, that was something I wanted to spend a lot more of my time. I wanted to take a break, but not a full break. So whatever, I wanted to be semi-retired for a while.
Sounds like you were in the -1 stage.
Yeah. So I wanted to be semi-retired. So I said, okay, the 50% time that I work will be mostly on these things. So I doubled down on obviously investing a lot, but I started this unique accelerator for Series B plus companies called X to 10X. And I worked with, through that, bunch of founders. It's now been 5-6 years. So the team has now worked with almost 400 growth companies, which is probably like half the India growth market.
Incredible.
In different ways. So through that journey, I saw that, one, there is a lot of power in creating a platform in this space. So this was a platform for growth companies. And that there is, I firsthand saw the entrepreneurial energy sort of growing, right? Year after year, just the sheer number of these startups and the type of things they were doing. So I was seeing that firsthand. And then I was thinking on the back of the mind, okay, this is for growth. There is early stage, so what all can be done there? And then I came and met you, and you were like, oh yeah, we want to probably think about India, and I was like, yeah, let's go. It's the time is
let's go.
The time is now. There's just so much entrepreneurial energy, and I feel like I think if we can create platforms where you can channel that energy that is there in the country into the right problems, into the right way of thinking, way of doing, I think I think the entrepreneurs can achieve so much. So I think that's what really excited me. I was already sort of thinking about it. You were already thinking about it. So it's like, okay, let's just do it. And it's been, I did sort of that one small push that day, and I think you've been on it since every day. So Aditya sent me a message almost every day, every other day. Oh, today I've done this. Today I've done this. Connect me to the recruiter. Connect me to this person, and
It's
he's been
like
fully on it.
yeah, it's like when I when I basically decide to do something, it's like the thread is in my head, so Binny's gonna
I'm
get
like, oh
harassed.
yeah, he really took it seriously, man. Now I really need to spend time on this.
Yeah, one of the things, and by the way, I think Jonathan will. Where are you, JB? Okay. I mean, Jonathan will maybe formally, kind of also post this later today, but we're actually having our launch, soft launch event in Bangalore on June 13th. So if you happen to be there, please join us. If you have anybody in your network who you think might be fun for us to invite, who you think might actually benefit from the SPC philosophy, please kind of like let them know. Shoot us an email just so that we know that it's we are expecting quite a few signups, so we'll make sure we let your friends in. Uh, but the thing that always stands out to me when you go to like India is like the sheer entrepreneurial energy. Like there's just a lot of hustle, and there's a lot of like that energy of like how do I build things, how do I improve my life, right? Like people actually view like starting a company, doing something from scratch as a means to improve their life in pretty profound, meaningful ways. And that's, I don't know, there's like this, almost like this energy. One of my friends, Avichal, said it right, which is that this energy from like 1950s, 1960s America, which is that it's kind of post-war, like let us go and rebuild the country using kind of like sheer will and sheer like essentially like, force of will. And I see that in India right now. And given that that exists and there's a sheer amount of technical talent, it's just an insane combination. Just super excited to be spending time there. I have a bunch more questions that I'm happy to get into, but instead I will open it up to the audience. Dylan, I see your hand up. What's up, man?
What is SPC and what are the types of people in SPC India?
What is South Park Commons and what are the kinds of people that we want in SPC India? I think this sounds like a question for me. Absolutely not planted. I'd say that one of the things that we have struggled with over the years is like how do you crisply articulate like the category of SPC in a way, because it's a net new concept, right? It has existed in bits and parts, but it's not been easy to describe. I think Jonathan has obviously really helped us to coin this term called -1 to 0. The way I think of SPC is that we enable really, really talented technologists to come and essentially like spend like 6-9 months figuring out like what is a problem worth tackling, right? Like what is the mountain you want to climb before you actually start climbing it. And I think that the core mythologies that we are challenging is that I think in Silicon Valley and maybe in Bangalore as well, the core mythology always feels like a smart person went up to the top of the mountain, they kind of had a stroke of inspiration and they came back with the product that they like gave to the world, right? And I just like disagree with that. I think most great things are done by like, smallish groups of elite people, all kind of like in a competitive collaborative setting, whether it be like elite athletes, whether it be the elite musicians in like the world's best orchestras, whether it be like academic institutions. You have like this high talent density, whether it be Xerox Spark like back in the day, right? Like all like these settings where you get a bunch of really good people, you give them some structure and you kind of allow them to have this collaborative, so they're kind of like critiquing each other, giving each other feedback, motivating each other, but also a little competitive, right? Like you want to be the best of that group, why not, right? And I think those settings are the ones that produce like the breakthrough, like advances, whether it be, or the breakthrough companies. And my goal, like I think of SPC as trying to provide that environment that allows that profile of person to find like ideas that they otherwise might not have been able to do in isolation, right? Like that is our core thesis. We have been, I think the thesis is playing out really well in San Francisco, in New York. We are also big believers in like this kind of collaboration must happen in person, right? So this is why we provide this space. We have our space in New York. We'll get some nice space in Bangalore. But at its core, like SPC is like a group of like really smart people, all kind of pushing each other to like go out and build a bigger one, to actually to go challenge themselves to have a better idea than they would be able to do in isolation. Yeah. What is the second part of your question? What are the kinds of people that we want to have in SPC Bangalore? Thank you. Not that I asked you to say that, but yes, I would say that the kinds of people that we would want, it's my North Star for the profile of person is similar to the North Star we have here and in New York. Like, I want people who are willing to kind of like get a little uncomfortable for 3 to 6 months, who are not like so eager to have their idea like figured out yesterday, who are kind of like willing to be like, yeah, in my effort to find something awesome, I might have to throw away 2 ideas, who are willing to live with that like discomfort of not knowing what they want to do. I also want people who frankly are top of the game, like whatever discipline you have chosen, to be like a software engineer, to be a machine learning kind of like research scientist, to even be a product designer. I want you to have proven that you are capable of like playing that game at the highest level through something in your like background, right? And lastly, like I want to see people who are comfortable building. Like I love memos and decks, but I kind of want to see people rolling up their sleeves and building on a daily basis. And we don't need our take is always that our team at SPC here, we spend like a ungodly amount of time on a weekly basis just like talking to new members and doing what we call community curation. This is one of the biggest values that we provide. So we're going to be doing the same for India. Binny and I were just talking, we anticipate quite a bit of demand for this space. So a large part of what we're going to have to do is like, how do we make sure we kind of find the people who really embody both the skills but also the philosophy of what we want.
For Binny about, or both of you, about exit ambitions. In the Indian ecosystem, especially relative to the US or US market space, there was a recently Gokul Adram.
That's a good tweet.
Yeah, so you know about the Indian IPO process.
So we kind of set the trend for that. So we paid like $1 billion in tax to take our payments company back to India. So from Singapore, yeah.
So you can take the question wherever you want, but regards to like the IPO exit ambitions, but specifically also about American companies looking to the Indian public market.
So on the first part, I think on the exit ambition, so there is now, I think the Indian public markets have kind of accepted and actually embraced tech companies in a big way. Which was always the risk that global investors saw. So I think that is sort of well proven now from an exit standpoint. There's still, since the ecosystem is still not as big and as mature, I think the M&A is still somewhat of an option, but not as big an option, which I see here in the US. So you can get acquired by a bigger Indian startup or maybe a global startup.
But that's changing. Like
global tech company.
Like even like the acquisition of like Indian companies by global companies and so on have recently been happening, right?
Right. Yeah. So it is happening, but it is, I would say, at a much smaller scale than what I see here. But I think public markets are completely open. If you've built a good enough business, which is going to be profitable soon, you don't need to be profitable. You can go public and get decent multiples, really good multiples and exits. And I think to Gokul's point, you can be public in India at a much smaller scale than you can be public in the US, so which becomes a major sort of advantage as well for founders in India.
Actually, like market multiples for a number of these companies are actually like way better than the multiples that you'll get here. And the reason is because of what Binny said earlier, right? Which is that India still has that 10x potential for growth, just like intrinsically built into like the economy. Whereas, India's economy is growing at what, 12? No, what is the number per year? 12?
6-7% now.
6-7%? Sure, but like compared to like it's double at least of the United States, right? So like if you kind of look at that over a 20-year period, that number adds up. Yeah. Yes. Please, can I give you the mic? Not that we have been using it that much, but okay, yeah.
Hey, thanks for the talk, Binny. I've always wanted to ask this question. So I started my career with Snapdeal in 2015.
Oh shit.
I think there was a very interesting point of time in e-commerce. Amazon just entered and announced that they would invest 5 billion or something like that. But I want to ask you, like, what do you think in your space, probably the top two reasons why Flipkart has been continued to win the market, and we've seen like downfall of some of the other companies,
Yeah.
apart from the capital?
Yeah. No, I think it goes back to sort of the core roots of how we started and I think the culture. So I think the Flipkart brand. So Flipkart was built on sort of the brand was built based on the customer experience we provided. So it was very focused on consumer experience since the day we started. So that built a very strong brand for us. And I think the team that we had was just like way beyond any sort of team in corporate India, including like Amazon. The people that Amazon hired or recruited in India were sort of nowhere close match to what we had. I think the Amazon US team was really good, but somehow in India they couldn't replicate that type of talent density and talent pool either. So I think those were sort of, I think, a big two reasons. And the third I would say was also we took some very important decisions during the time when we were fighting this battle with a long-term sort of point of view versus short-term point of view. So I think at that time when Amazon said we'll invest 5 billion, and it wasn't just that they said, they were investing that 5 billion. And we used to have in our board meetings, that was a very critical topic, that how should we fight it, because we were losing share for the first 12-18 months. And so we had to take hard calls on firstly deciding on focusing on a couple of areas really deeply and actually letting go of some of the categories and letting Amazon win in the short term. And secondly on people and changing the teams in a big way as well. So some of that meant that, for example, 2016 for us was like the first 6 months of 2016 we grew 0% for the first time in our history for 6 months. And by mid of 16 then we started investing back in growth. We had reduced our burn by almost 50-60%, and we started to fight back in those 2-3 areas that we said. So we said fashion and electronics, which are the biggest categories, that we will sort of double down on and fight and grow, and other stuff where Amazon systems were stronger with like books and general merchandise, etc. We'll kind of let them take it away. So I think it was a combination of these 3-4 things which really mattered to sort of to win in the long term.
The bull case for India is pretty strong. So I built my first company in India and I'm here trying to build the second one. I understand the bull case, but do you think the recent advancements in AI is changing some of those things or will pose barriers? Because a lot of jobs, India has been a net exporter of technology services or business process outsourcing services and so on, and that now can be automated to a certain extent or significant extent. The call centers are going to go and so on and so forth. So would love to hear your thoughts on how you see the future in the next 5 years and then in 10 years.
Yeah. So I think, I have a totally opposite perspective to that. So I think AI probably is a big game changer from a jobs perspective. Actually, it can be a big creator of jobs in a country like India versus a destroyer of jobs. If you think about the IT services, BPO industry, especially IT services, like a new job came into town, right, called coding. Year two, software started becoming more and more important in the world, and we had this talent pool which could do that job well, and it became a huge industry in India. And if you think about the effect of AI on work, all these, AI is going to change the way a lot of people work in the jobs. A lawyer's job changes in a big way. If you're working in marketing, design, creatives, your job changes. How you work changes in a big way. So a lot of different jobs will change in a big way. And India has like the world's obviously largest young population right now. So 1 out of 4 working age people are going to be in India in the next like 10 to 30 years. So where can you train? Like, and anybody sitting anywhere in India can be working today in today's world for any company, big or small. So I think if you put all these things together, I think it's a huge opportunity to train a talent sort of engine, talent pool of the future, which can be working for anybody sitting from anywhere. So I think my take is actually the opposite, that I think AI can be a big tailwind for job creation than today. It will take away some jobs, but I think it will create like maybe 10 times more than it takes away.
Hey, I want to go back to your comment about deep tech and how you're seeing that there is still some gap between India and perhaps US and China. So I was wondering if you would agree with the idea that the Chinese protected their tech industry from US companies, and LLM competitors from China, etc., are coming from the Google equivalents in China, right? So you have that Google talent that goes deep tech, and that evolution, to your point, never really happened in India. So do you think that for deep tech, India needs a different strategy to get that evolution going, or do you think it'll happen on its own in a different way?
I think it's also a function of scale. I think China is probably just in scale is way ahead, right? It's like 10 years ahead, 8-10 years ahead in its evolution of the whole technology ecosystem. And I mean, obviously they also invested proactively in areas like EV and others. So I think one is just, I think if you think 8-10 years ahead, we will have even more density and of talent. So I definitely see a point where 8-10 years from now we would start seeing things that we are seeing in China right now. We will start seeing a lot of that happening in India. I think for me it's more a function of time than anything else.
It's also tricky, man. Like, if you want a state-controlled economy and kind of like a government that can do that, then you can't just have the good parts. I think you might need the whole shebang.
Or the big family houses may take over if you give them protectionism. That's also thing.
That's possible. It's possible without naming any names. Yeah, but I think what's interesting is that like it's actually I don't actually think it's well understood. Like, what are the starting conditions for allowing like deeper technology kind of like ecosystems to play out? I would argue that we have some examples of that in America. They seem a little bit randomizing, honestly. We have some examples from China. I suspect for India, like as it matures, it will find its own way.
Yeah.
But I don't actually know the shape of it. Something that has to work with frankly, our governmental system, but also like our existing corporate structures and where the pools of capital lie. But I don't actually know yet exactly what that looks like.
Just to follow on to that thought, when you compare with China, it's a big country, all of that. But what about Israel? Israel has deep tech, and we can't. So I almost see it as India refuses to invest in deep tech. They're very vested in what's easy.
But arguably, Israel does get government funding through the IDF.
And why doesn't India invest in that? Is the question. Why doesn't the government in India invest in deep tech?
I think it is. I think the government investment is part of the equation. I think it's not like the equation. I think Israel has deep tech because sometime somewhere something started, and I think it sort of evolved into
what happened in India, and those things have also happened in India, right? So if you talk
those things haven't clearly, right? So otherwise we would have the deep tech ecosystem in India as well. So I think, as I said, there are things happening, and hopefully the ecosystem starts getting built around around that. I mean, you could ask the same questions 10 years back on, why doesn't India have a startup ecosystem?
Yeah.
Right? America has such a great startup ecosystem. Look at China; they've done so well. What should the government do? And we are sitting here with an amazing sort of startup ecosystem in the country, and it's not because the government did these 5 things and this happened, right? So I think it is the same thing. I think it has to start somewhere, and it evolves.
My takeaway as like as a somewhat distant observer is that the Indian system is chaotic, and it kind of like has to play out slowly. It will converge to the right outcome, but I think any efforts to top-down direct it will probably backfire. Like, not to be too cute about it, but I'd say that India was doing hard tech. They were trying to build cars, and we got ambassadors and Marutis, right? Not like the best cars. So like, I think it's a good thing when the government decides to actually let like a bunch of like competition come in. I do think, for what it's worth, there's probably a bigger role for the government to play. Again, it's kind of hard to know what is the exact like implementation of that in a way that doesn't lead to graft and corruption, in my opinion. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
We discussed a lot about talent. If you think about the number of engineers that we produce in India, the number is pretty high. It also leads back to the conversations. One thing that I've seen is we're afraid of failing forward.
Paying it forward.
Failing forward.
Failing forward, what does that mean?
Failing forward means like, I can fail and it's okay, but I'm learning out of it. That's something, even when you mentioned about SPC, you mentioned you want to attract top talent, but it's also building that. So what changes you guys think you can bring in as a community or ecosystem?
I mean, one of the things, can I take this first part?
Sure.
So one of the first thing I'll say is like, this wasn't our intention in the early days, but one of the biggest values that SPC provides is that when somebody asks you like, hey, what do you, like, you don't have a job, what are you doing? You can actually have a way to tell, I'm at South Park Commons. What's South Park Commons? So it's a place where really smart people hang out, aka telling people that you're also smart. And by the way, we are all ideating and jamming on new things, right? But by giving people a way to talk about this in-between stage, I think it makes it more approachable. And then also in some ways, like, you can kind of be like, I spent 6 months, maybe you didn't come up with a great idea, you failed, but then it's fine because you're like, I kind of spent 6 months, like ideating, exploring, tinkering, and then decided the best opportunity was whatever, at OpenAI, right? Like, and we see this a bunch at SPC, we encourage it, because one of the ways that we are different is that we're not trying to drive everyone to start a company. Like, we think that successful outcomes out of SPC can take many forms, and it is actually precisely to enable people to fail forward, if you will.
Yeah. And then, I think, again, that equation is sort of changing very rapidly, right? Joining a startup in engineering schools and MBA schools was probably like day 3, day 4 option for people, and that's the days we would get to go there. And today, like day 1, I think that's probably the first option for more than half the people in most of the schools is to join one or the other startup, and that then translates into sort of people wanting to start as well by seeing other people's journey. So again, I think it is changing like at exponential rate. There's a long way to go, long way to go, but it is changing. So I think I don't think there's anything needs to be done to accelerate that, but what needs to be done is to provide the right path to people who are now thinking that I maybe want to do this, and this gives them a nudge. Oh yes, because this thing exists, now I can take the next step, and then hopefully after they take that next step, then how do you channel sort of them on the right path, where it might not be that they start a company, as you said, it might be something else, but give them sort of this way of navigating that journey.
You'd be surprised as to like how high status like becoming a founder in India is becoming.
Actually, it's becoming the opposite. I've met a lot of founders who want to start something because they want to be a founder. It's not because they want to. It's not because they are passionate about a problem or something. It's like because I'll be a founder of my company.
There's like a Shark Tank India. You have no idea how many relatives will be like, I do this SPC thing, we help. They're like, so you run Shark Tank? I'm like, not exactly, but I think, sure, why not? Maybe 2 more questions. You've been raising your hand. Go ahead.
Something that I've been noticing among my peers in the US, including myself, like there's a huge like tech boom happening in India for sure, and like few of us are like, oh, we'll move back to India. One constant thing that always comes up in this conversation, which is a common dinner time conversation, is the work culture over there. What's your take on that? How is that different compared to the US? Yeah.
Sounds like there's a comment in the question first, so you might as well you might as well get your point of view out first.
No, I don't. I haven't worked in India.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, so I don't have a bias or anything. I'm just saying that.
Well played. Yeah.
Yeah. But again, it's hard to,
Yeah.
but what needs to change? Cultures are different in every company. So it depends on what company in India you're joining. There's no India culture, right? There is going to be culture of Flipkart, there's going to be culture of Snapdeal or PhonePe or of the next startup which is coming up. So I think it really depends on the company you are joining. I think culture at every company would be different.
Like grind culture.
There is no exactly, yeah. Every place would have a different sort of.
There's no 996 in India.
Yeah.
Is it called 99? Yeah, 996.
Yeah, there would be 996 in some places. There would be.
There wouldn't be in others.
Work from home, work culture in other places. So, yeah.
So I mean that's a good thing, right? That means there's more diversity in terms of options.
Yeah.
Much like you have it here, right?
Yeah.
Last question, you maybe? Yes. Here, so that the people. Well, the people on the live stream do. Okay, yeah, all right.
I think one of the really cool things that you spoke about was just the fact that there's like different languages, different kind of ways that you cannot tap into a bunch of markets in India, and that does make it slower and things like that. What I think is exciting and a potential is the whole way that like LLMs, AI can help with like local languages, personalization, things like that. Do you think it is a massive unlock and will actually help startups kind of accelerate faster, reach bigger markets faster, and or is there kind of a barrier there?
No, definitely. I think
Good question.
LLMs and this are going to solve, or I think application-wise, solve this language barrier pretty soon in a lot of different ways. So that definitely accelerates the journey for Indian startups into markets in India, but it also accelerates actually the journey for companies, the B2B software companies and founders thinking about global companies out of India into other non-English speaking markets as well. So I think it's not just in India. I think it also helps Indian founders build global companies faster as well.
Interesting. That's a good question. Actually, one more, if anybody has any. I'm trying to see who's been raising their hands for a while. You, sir, go for it.
So this is direct towards Binny Bansal. Flipkart has spun out almost all segments of digital e-commerce. So you did e-commerce, you did logistics, you did payments, you did lending also. And that market has, I think, kind of saturated. So when you're starting the SPC Bangalore chapter and you are going to curate brilliant minds, do you have some top problems, India-specific problems that you want to solve? Or you want to keep it like homogeneous? Hey, brilliant people come on board and solve these global problems.
Yeah, I think it is more focused on the people who I think sort of have probably will have a better understanding what problems to solve. I think, but I don't think any of these things are mature. As I said before, I think even e-commerce, I think it's just getting started. 90% of it is yet to be done. Even in e-commerce payments, in all of these areas. So I think there are just big problems to solve everywhere. So it's a much more homogeneous. It's going to be a much more homogeneous approach centered around people than the other way around.
Were you talking about SPC India in particular, or just in general, like how big? Yeah, I mean, okay, sure. I love that you're asking about SPC India. Why don't I answer the question? But what I'd say is that I think we definitely. I mean, it's very similar to, I would say, again, SF in New York, where we have never actually been super top down in terms of asking people to work in certain areas. Like, my take is always that if you are literally attracting the best in the field, who are kind of like experts at the frontier, then they by definition know more than you. and you should actually be letting them figure out like, where the opportunities are. Now, does hopefully like conversations with SPC staff end up like nudging, shaping people's opinions? Probably, but that's bilateral. Like it kind of works. They influence us, we influence them. Specifically to India, I would love to kind of see people who are willing again to take like really big bets. And then those big bets could be in traditional categories like that are somewhat, I would say, understood, like e-commerce, but those still have a ton of headroom. But I also want to see stuff that feels technically a little bit harder, closer to the deep tech, that maybe hasn't had as much of an ecosystem. But what I really don't want to see is just like tackling almost like well understood things because somebody just wants to be a founder and kind of like check that off. That's just not that interesting. I think that I want them to just take much bigger risk than maybe some of the other ecosystems might enable them to, or other programs might enable them to. Okay, we're going to wrap up here, folks. We ran a little bit over. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the great questions. Thank you, Mr. Binny, for a fantastic event.